and tensions of collectivity and individuality, as well as approaches to alternative learning and research. I mean, this is what the entire exhibition kind of is about. We are really happy to have the opportunity to kind of reflect within this space. So my name is Mark Tay, and I'm a performance maker and researcher. Stephanie has already explained. And I come from Five Arts Centre. And today we have 8 people here. So 3 of us are from Five Arts, Anne James and Jun Tan as well. But we've also invited our close and frequent collaborators over the last 15 years. So you will hear from each of us in turn. These are people who are filmmakers, designers, activists, artists in their own right. And we've been working a lot together over the last 15 years collaboratively. Yeah, Five Arts Centre was first formed in 1984. So this is kind of a few generations, maybe 1 or 2 generations down from that, just to establish that. But Anne is from the first generation, just to also establish that. Yeah. So let me share some slides and then share a bit of context before we go into exactly what we're trying to do today, okay? Okay, so you all can see these slides, right?
Yes.
Great. So today, what we're doing is actually we're going to be sharing keywords that relate to our collaborative practice, the 8 of us, over the last, say, 15 years. And that's because within the context of the exhibition that Stephanie and her collaborators have put together, we, in the Art Museum of the Guangzhou Academy of Fine Art, we have a simple installation that slowly reveals the keywords that we collected from ourselves that define our practice. Yeah. And basically what we would like to do today is to kind of expand on these keywords really and discuss several of the keywords. We're not going to go through all because I think there's about 20 odd of them, and we're just going to select 1 each. For those who have not seen the exhibition, we also are not able to go to the exhibition for obvious reasons. We're all in KL. The exhibition also includes a whole bunch of documents that Stephanie has pulled together that she feels is most important to highlight about the practice of Five Arts Centre and our collaborators. So just briefly, there are archival documents and materials from Five Arts' production history, which has been redesigned very playfully by Jansen. So thanks very much. That's what you see on the walls here, right? And our website address is there. You can pull out the kind of tag from them and take them home and surf it on your own site. We have a very short video that we made earlier this year, kind of reintroducing Five Arts after 37 years. We have an introduction to Baling, one of our performances that we'll be talking more about today. We also have a text which I wrote to kind of mark the end of an era as Five Arts Centre moves to a new place and space in the new year. We move out of our studio after 23 years. And also we have a code of conduct which we developed last year, actually discussing discrimination, bullying, and harassment in the performing arts. And we thought it was really interesting that this was a document that Stephanie felt important to include in the context of this exhibition. And lastly, there's an essay as well on the development of non-formal education in Malaysia since the 1970s, looking at the work of Janet Pillay, who is a member of Five Arts Centre, as well as her colleagues and collaborators, which includes people like Anne, as well as Charlene Rajendran, who is also in the Zoom session today. So it looks at this practice since the 1970s as a kind of form of alternative pedagogy in the arts. Yeah. So this is what you might encounter in the exhibition space if you could visit. And before going to reveal and expand on some of the keywords that we're talking about, let me just provide a bit of context about Malaysia. so that we have some basic kind of frameworks to work with, as well as our work. Yeah. So obviously you see lots of maps on screen here. And what I've done is kind of pulled together, about 8 or 9 maps that go back 110 years. And these are maps of a place that we now call Malaysia. But if we go back even just 70 years ago, Malaysia did not exist. So what, very, very quickly, we can see here are the changes over time of territories, borders, flags, names of this thing that eventually became Malaysia. And obviously imagination, a kind of national imagining, right? In 1957, Malaya became independent. In 1963, it joined with Singapore, Sarawak, and Sabah in Borneo to become Malaysia. And in 1965, Singapore separated from the Federation, and that's been the kind of geo-body that we've had since then. But basically, this is just to show you the constructedness of the nation state. And it's also just to say that it's still a very peninsular or West Malaysia centric perspective. I mean, all of us are from West Malaysia. We could tell the story from another perspective. I'm sure most of you will know by now that Malaysia is a very multicultural and intercultural place. We've had lots of waves of settlers and colonizers over the decades and centuries. We've had the Dutch, the British, the Japanese, and Portuguese, and for the last 60 odd years, we've been colonized by our own government, the Barisan Nasional, which we can talk a little bit more about later. So I turn now to the early days of the collaborations between about half of the people that you will be hearing from today. And about almost 20 years ago now, when we were in our early 20s or mid 20s, many of us started working together in community arts projects, what might now be referred to as socially engaged arts projects, working in kind of low-income communities, in urban communities in Kuala Lumpur, working with young people, teenagers, to look at telling their own stories through visual arts, theater, film, and so on and so forth. So we slowly began to create artworks together. This group of collaborators made up of filmmakers, theater practitioners, designers, activists, making performances, exhibitions, participatory projects, documentary films, yeah, and also organizing festivals or curatorial projects, maybe. So in 2008, we initiated a project called the Emergency Festival, which looked at the 1948 to 1960 Malayan emergency, or essentially war. During this 12-year period, it was a kind of fight and struggle between the British, the Barisan, what would eventually become the Barisan National government, as well as the outlawed Communist Party of Malaya. Yeah. So we started looking into this area around 2007, 2008, because it was the 50th anniversary of Malayan independence. And there was a lot of desires, not just from us, but others, to kind of revisit, relook at, and reframe alternative histories in Malaysia. But today, a lot of what we will be mainly talking about will centralize around these 3 particular projects or performances. So this, what you see on screen, is a performance called Baling. It's a performance where we use transcripts of the failed 1955 peace talks between the 2 chief ministers of Malaya and Singapore, and the most wanted criminal in the British Empire, or the most wanted man in the British Empire, the communist leader Chin Peng. So we found the transcripts, and in this performance, the performers say the lines from these talks, as well as share their own perspectives of the figure of Chin Peng, this terrorist and most wanted person in the British Empire. Yeah, we will expand more on this in a little while. There is another performance that we might touch on in various ways, called Version 2020, where basically we time travel to the year 2020. This was a kind of vision that was launched by Mahathir Mohamad in 1991, our former Prime Minister. It was the ambition to become a high-income first world nation. And many of us grew up with this in the background in the 1990s. So we worked with 5 performers to share their experiences, to present their own versions of 2020. Yeah, so it's a show that kind of time travels between notions of the future and the past and the present, dystopias and utopias. And lastly, there is a performance that we have also been working on, and we still hope to work on, called A Notional History, which really is a performance that looks at history textbooks, where we kind of look at the limits of inclusion and exclusion in official Malaysian history textbooks. So in 2018, Malaysia changed government for the first time after 61 years under the Barisan National Coalition. And coincidentally, the history textbooks were going to be reviewed by this government anyway in 2019, the following year, but they lost the elections. So suddenly this created a lot of anxiety about what would be represented in the history books, what would be taken out, how would history be rewritten, literally. And we worked with a performer, a journalist, and a activist to kind of look at their relationships with these history textbooks. And we also included in the show the perspectives of 12 exiled Communist Party of Malaya members that we interviewed more than 10 years ago. So what is included in a textbook, what is included in the borders. Over the session, we will be unpacking some of this. Yeah. Maybe just 2 small notes. One is that in our performances, the performers often perform as themselves on stage. And someone has said that watching our performances often feels like they're watching an editing machine on stage, because we put together, edit, collage, documents, personal narratives, personal experiences, historical documents, images, our own personal artifacts, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So we return now to the keywords, and I will slowly shut up and give way to others, because that's the point of the discussion. In this talk, we will be, the idea behind this talk is to have a more poly-perspectival kind of entry point to our work, So there will be different ways of looking at the same thing, sometimes the same images. We've each selected a keyword to talk about, and as we speak, you may notice some overlaps and maybe different ways of thinking about these fragments or these keywords in our work. Don't worry if you can't capture all of them, because that it's fragmented. And as Stephanie says in her curatorial text, I quote, "Under this framework, individuals and the collective nurture one another, but at the same time, chaos occurs and demands more encounter, adjustment, and exploration." So to help navigate through these keywords and landscapes, we will start from the perspectives of those who tend to appear on stage in our performances, to zoom into the experiences embodied by our performers. And then we will slowly zoom out to perhaps the less obvious things that go on behind the scenes in our performances. So, Anne James, please.
Through my eyes. Hi, my name is Anne James. I am a Malaysian. I am Christian. I am of Indian descent. I am an actress. I am a teacher, and I am a member of Arts Centre. So in this brief talk this morning, I will recount my journey into this project, which is my personal journey, which involves my history, myself as a student, my work as a teacher, and finally, my work as a performer. I was born in April 1955 in the state of Kedah, which borders Thailand. I was born 2 years and 4 months before my country gained independence on the 31st of August, 1957. The Baling talks were held over 2 days in December 1955 in Baling, far to the southeast of my state. It was held in a primary school, which was then known as Baling English School. Today, it is known as SK Tunku Putra, named after our first Prime Minister. The meeting was intended to end the conflict between two protagonists, the leader of the soon-to-be independent Malaya, Tunku Abdul Rahman, and the leader of the Malayan communist state, Chin Peng. Unfortunately, peace was not on the cards and the talks failed. The conflict between the government forces and the Communist Party only heightened and ended only in 1960 when the Malayan government declared an end to the emergency. Now, while all this was going on, I was a child. I lived a very simple and idyllic life in Alusta, Kedah, running around in paddy fields, avoiding buffaloes in mud holes, climbing trees, and going to a convent school. The emergency did not affect my life very much in the urban areas. But if you lived in what was called a black area, like Baling district, you were very much affected. There were curfews, police roadblocks, police raids, and likely worse. Now, I was very oblivious to all of this, even though my father worked in the police force. He worked as a secretary in the office of the Chief of Police of Kedah. I'm sure he was privy to a lot of inside information about the insurgency, but we heard nothing. Two of my uncles also worked in the police force. One of them was in the special branch, which is the Malaysian secret police. As an adult, when I was an adult, he worked in Hajai on the Thai border and was probably involved in the peace talks held between the Malaysian government and the Malayan Communist Party in the late 1980s. Now, I, as a student in secondary school in the mid-1960s, in our history books, studied the Second World War. And we read about the anti-Japanese warfare waged by the communists from the jungles of Malaya. They were aided by the British, as you can see in this book and this photograph. We were told of guerrilla groups like Force 136 and their struggle against the Japanese, which was during the war led mainly by the Communist Party of Malaya. Then we studied what the communists did after the war. And what we studied in our history books was not a pretty picture. The communists were painted as bad people who caused great hardship and hampered the independence of Malaya from the British colonialists. Next slide. Our struggle for independence was painted as two-pronged, striving for independence from the British and a war against the communists. In my history book, when I was in secondary school, there was a chapter that contained a short discussion about the Baling talks. I remember two photos, the photo of Tunku Abdul Rahman at one table and Chin Peng, the leader of the Communist Party, at the other table. This image would recur over and over again. In 1979, I completed my university studies in performing arts and history. And then I started teaching history in secondary schools. Again, the Baling talks were mentioned in a paragraph or two with these same two photos. Now, in that same history book, which I taught, I remember there were a few interesting chapters. A chapter on feudalism, one chapter on democracy, and one on socialism and communism. I remember a photo of Karl Marx in the chapter on communism. Communism was painted as an oppressive system. It was made clear that democracy was a choice made by Malaysia. Then, in 2008, my journey into what happened during the emergency and contemporary Malaysian history began afresh with Five Arts Centre and the projects initiated by Mark Tay. It was during an event called the Emergency Festival. I realized how much we as a nation had been educated into forgetting, erasing, and burying all other narratives about our history. This was also when the text of the actual Baling talks were read verbatim for the first time in front of an audience. And that's me in that red blouse. I was one of the readers. 7 years later, in 2015, Mark invites me to be part of the Baling Talks project. In doing the research for the project, I visited my uncle, who was with the special branch. He had retired by then. I tried to find out what he knew had happened during the emergency. I talked to him about the peace talks with the communists along the Thai border because he was stationed there until he was retired. Unfortunately, I got very little information from him. He was very, very tight-lipped. In fact, he sounded like he was very much anti-communist. Now, there's a scene in the Baling talks between Faik and I, where I describe how the only clear photograph of Chin Peng is obtained by the British. In 1947, a 23-year-old Chin Peng goes to a photo studio to take a passport photo. He's followed into the photo studio by a special branch agent, not my uncle. He wasn't there yet. It is this photo that is used by the British and the Malayan government in all the wanted posters of Chin Peng. This photo of Chin Peng is not in our history books. It was as an actor that I experienced the Baling talks again, Chin Peng, walking in their shoes, embodying them. The Baling talks happened at a pivotal point in our Malaysian history. My nation could have taken many different points at that moment in history. The image of the two protagonists from my history books keep rising. The two forces struggling over which way Malaysia would go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Fahmi Redza. I'm a political graphic designer and visual activist based in Kuala Lumpur. Merdeka means independence, and 1957 is the year of independence for Malaya, that later formed Malaysia in 1963. Malaya was colonized by the British for over 150 years. And if you search Merdeka 1957 on Google or any search engine, you will get these image results. As you can see, there is one image that pops up and usually appears as the top search results. It is a photo taken on August 31st, 1957, of the first Prime Minister of Malaya, Tunku Abdul Rahman, declaring independence in front of the British, the Malay rulers, and thousands of people during the Independence Day ceremony inside the stadium. And when you ask a Malaysian about the history of Merdeka or independence, this is usually the image that pops into their minds. This is the image that we see during Independence Day every year on national TV, newspaper, social media, and the image that we see painted on murals all over the country. And recently, the image was the main source of inspiration for the design of the tallest building in Malaysia, the Merdeka 118 Tower, which is currently the second tallest building in the world. You can even see the same image used on the front cover of history textbooks used in schools. When you talk about official history of Merdeka or independence, this is it. The history textbooks is nothing but official history, the mainstream political narrative of the history of the nation, the history written by the state, by the ruling elite, by the people in power. This is a photo taken from our show, A Notional History. I was pointing to a page from the 2007 Malaysian High School Certificate Exam paper for history. Question 54. This photo shows Tunku Abdul Rahman, our first Prime Minister, declaring independence for Malaya. How would you feel if you were there attending the ceremony? 1. Love for the country. 2. Respect for the national symbol. 3. Grateful to be a citizen. Or 4. Proud of the struggle of our national leaders. As teenagers, we all went through 5 years of high school and studied 5 official history textbooks. If this is the official history of Merdeka, then in our shows, we present the alternative history of Merdeka, of independence, the alternative narrative of the struggle for independence, the counter narrative to contest the mainstream narrative of Merdeka. Stories that were omitted from the history textbooks. Stories of counter heroes, stories of regular people like you and me. And because all history textbooks are the construction of the authors and the state, it will always present the national narrative of those currently in power. So there will always be gaps and blanks. And there will always be a need for more counter narratives to fill in those gaps and blanks. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Hi, my name is Imri Nasution. I am a filmmaker. I work mostly in TV and mainstream media. The keyword I will be presenting today is evidence. I've been collaborating with this gang of friends since 2002 on an exhibition titled Chow Kit Fest. Back then, I was not sure how I could contribute to the bigger picture of collaborative work. I just felt these were a bunch of very interesting people to work with. In fact, I don't think we knew where we were heading to or how far this collaboration would go. We've now been working together for roughly 20 years. As a collaborator, one of the activities we had to do was to collect documents and evidences pertaining to the subjects we were exploring. This involves a lot of digging into books, records, pictures, footages, and talking to people. Talking to people and listening to them unveil the events of time has always been an eye-opener for me. Here you see the back of my head recording. These people were witnesses of time. They are living vessels of history and events. Like witnesses at a court case, they are part of the evidence. Since 2006, most of my involvement on the performances we've had has been as performer. I was tasked mostly to retell the stories we have gathered. I performed as a journalist who documented the peace talks at Baling. I performed as politicians negotiating on the peace talks. I performed as witness to a bomb attack on a family. I had to embody the voice. I was performing as the vessel of evidence. As time passes, and as I mature into these works, I slowly realized that I am also now a part of the evidence. I have evolved into being the evidence itself. By the act of documenting, I have become a part of the witness. The lines between presenting the evidence and being the evidence was blending into each other. In some of our research gathering process, I became the evidence of events. I was there was no longer the words I hear from the interviewees I documented. It has now become my line as well. I was there. I was there performing for Merdeka Day. I was there interviewing Chin Peng. I was there interviewing Said Zahari. The thing I learn now is that we are part of the evidence of events. Either we choose to be actively involved or we become accidentally involved, we will always be a part of the evidence of events. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sam. I'm a multimedia and lighting designer. I'm mainly the tech guy for this group. My word is polyperspective. I would like to talk about Baling mainly. I think it has a great example of how polyperspective the performance is. So Baling is performed in a black box setting where the audience may move and sit anywhere they want, to change their perspective, to shift their views anytime during the show, because the performers are all around the space, including different things like documents, pictures, transcripts, books, tables and chairs, and some way also the control booth. Because we share the same space as the audience, there's always this sense of I see you, you see me, and you see us when performing Baling. Sometimes these objects around the space look like different things throughout the performance, like these books. In certain angle, looks like a map of Malaya, and at certain times, it will look like buildings and sometimes look like tombstones. We also use projectors to project videos, pictures, articles, news, all around the space, and sometimes on shop lots. And with the combo of the camera and the projector, we have a POV of the performer projected, looking into documents, evidence, and zooming into their personal lives. This constant recapturing, representing, and relooking has always been a fascinating thing that we deal with in our process of making shows. I think there's a lot of possibilities with tech. And lastly, how we see the lighting we use for us to be seen are normal household light bulbs, fluorescents, and theater lights. So to have different moods at seeing the documents, evidence, and performance. And maybe to suggest to also see the subject matter in a different light. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Faik. I'm a performer, and outside of the theatre work, I am a digital producer. Sorry, I don't have photos for us today. I just have my explanation of the word that I chose, which is belief. The word that I chose is belief, and it's because I believe that when we are in the rehearsal room together as collaborators, I have a belief in my fellow collaborators, a belief in each other that could have only developed through time spent with each other. I've known and worked with these guys in various capacities in the past 10, 15 years. And a lot of the times we use in creating our work, a lot of the times we use our own personal stories and memories to create our work. The stories of Imri going to Bangkok to shoot an interview with the exiled Communist Party leader Chin Peng, the stories of Fahmi Reza as a young student discovering punk music and rebellion, my own personal stories as I trace the memories of my father and his childhood friends about their own stories of the communists. These personal stories and memories needed to be heard first inside the rehearsal room in order for it to be believed. As collaborators, believe in them. I choose the word belief also because in the work that we do in Baling, for example, the characters are fighting for their own beliefs for a Malaysia that has not existed yet at that point in time. And I feel that this notion is echoed in the works that we do together as collaborators. We sit in a room together to try to imagine or reimagine and argue a landscape of Malaysia that might not exist yet at this point in time. A Malaysia that is conjured by our own personal beliefs. And that's all I gotta say. Thanks, guys.
Hi, my name is Desi. I'm a fine art graduate and I have been working across visual art, theatres, and film in Malaysia for decades. The words I choose is trust. I would like to start by sharing a photo from one of our works, A Notional History. The old people on the walls are the exile from my country. They are the living historical figures who have contributed to the independence of my country. But in the history textbook today, they are still being called the terrorists. So sometimes I wonder what kept them fighting in the jungle for almost 40 years, even though they were losing the battles. Is it merely because of political ideology? Or there is something more? This is a photo of some of us. We are from different ethnicity and we train in different disciplinary. We come across each other because of shared interests. We start to work together with a trust of our own instinct as we barely know each other in the beginning. Trust is the courage when a bunch of strangers decide to take a ride together. Trust takes time to build, to develop, and to establish. We started with a trust of our own, and through time, we developed the trust among each other collectively. Because of trust, we acknowledge that we are all very different individuals and work very differently. Because of trust, we are there to create mess, chaos, and be playful at all times. Because of trust, we managed to overcome many obstacles and challenges together. This group of collaborators will working many more years to come because the trust we have established will keep our creativity sustained. Thank you.
Okay, it's my turn. Yeah, it's really nice hearing from everyone, isn't it? The word that I elected to use is social actors. I should clarify that, primarily in the group, I work as the director. So I'm zooming out a little bit more to kind of consider how we look at who we are when we try and make shows together. I chose the word social actors because I felt like during the course of our work together, researching, devising, trying to make something invisible present in the rehearsal room and eventually bringing it to an audience. During this process of a production, but during a process of, say, 15 years, over a long time, we're actually wearing multiple hats, and some of these words that you can see here, it's very clear that we take research quite seriously, as has been alluded to by people like Fahmi Reza and Imri. We're collectors of materials and evidence gatherers. As Faik has just mentioned as well, we are often self-ethnographers. We are doing an ethnography of ourselves, our parents' experiences, and sometimes we create new experiences through our research, by going into the field and observing and sometimes intervening in some of these historical flows. We also sometimes think of ourselves a little bit like seismographers, people who pay attention to vibrations and earthquakes. But once an earthquake has happened, it's obvious, right? But we pay attention to like the smaller vibrations, I guess. And it's very clear, I think, that, the word social actor may just be another word for citizen, right? So citizen journalist or historian or detective or researcher, right? So taking this word social actor forward a little bit, I share here a graphic that is not ours or mine, but in fact, it is from the anthropologist Victor Turner, where he talks about social drama, right? And this kind of infinity loop or relationship between what he calls social drama that works in the world and aesthetic drama that works in consciousness, right? So let me unpack this a little bit. Like those of us who do theater, according to Turner's configuration anyway, we are probably on this side, the right side of the image. We are using and harnessing and employing theatrical techniques and staging in order to represent the world, right? To represent society, to represent politics, and all theater work from time immemorial kind of like has this kind of capability. But then if we go over to this side in the social drama, in off stage, so to speak, there is social and political action. We can think of political speeches, we can think of media broadcasts, we can think of press releases by the government and presidents and prime ministers, and even social media kind of communications as their kind of staging and theatrical techniques, right? So what is visible and hidden is kind of an inverse relationship between what we might call the aesthetic drama world and the social drama world. And I find this useful up to a certain degree, but as may be evident in what we've talked about so far, I think that the borders between these definitions are more porous, actually, or we've been trying to make them more porous in our work. And in fact, in the work that we try and create together, we try and pull these layers and make them obvious. And that is why the performers often are performing as themselves in our performances. And when they are, for example, performing as other people or using the words of other people, they declare that they are doing that in the performance, right? To constantly emphasize this collapsing, but also quotation that is happening. And I will stop there and give the final word to Jun Tan, I think.
Hello, hi everyone. So I'm June, or Cheng Feng Ai, which I hardly use because I've never sat for exam in Mandarin before. So I'm the producer of the group, which means what I generally do is really facilitate and try and encourage, not persuade, but try and encourage certain things to happen. And so I feel like a lot of times I'm a witness to really what is going on within the group dynamics, and with the word that is with the work that they hope to generate. So not just a witness, but continually witnessing. So I find it a very active process, something that I'm present, and also then my job is to either, you know, represent or retell or try and put it together, facilitate. So I find that I'm essentially with the group, we're actually trying to create a space and a platform. So a lot of this witnessing and being a witness is both design and undesign. So when I say design is something that kind of like, I feel like it's something that I should encourage in the case of, if you could move forward, this next slide, this show called 2080. This is actually Sam, our lighting designer, our technical designer, who was his first technical show, and it was through a discussion that we had. I think we were on tour, and he told me he wanted to do a show where the main actors were not actors, but were the technical sides, you know, with the equipment. So I thought that was really interesting idea, and I wanted to encourage Sam. So I said, I'll help you produce it. So I feel like that kind of like little push or a little kick. It's kind of like how I feel like I work with a lot of the people in this collective. So it's kind of knowing when to give a little kick and when to give a little pat. So yeah, it's defining that difference, like when to kick and when to pat. So so I find that then I realized, oh wow, this is Sam's kind of like first show, and I was very glad to be part of that process and to be a witness in his kind of trajectory and his kind of growth. Then there's the other type of witnessing, which is completely undesigned and not that you don't plan for. So when Fahmi Redza, who is so interested in counter narrative, got a bit of trouble by posting a photo of actually a playlist of the Queen in honor of the Queen, he got arrested. And because he got arrested, we were outside the police station showing solidarity. So another member of our collective, Fahmi Fadil, who was also in the show, is now an MP. He's a member of parliament. So he came out to show solidarity for Fahmi Reza. And then 2 weeks later, Fahmi Fadil got called up by the police for showing solidarity for Fahmi Reza being called up by the police. So we have this little photo where we see Fahmi Reza now showing solidarity for Fahmi Fadil, who's walking into the police station for being called up for showing solidarity for Fahmi Reza. So we call this like the infinity Fahmi loop, you know, kind of like passing the baton of showing solidarity. So I was there as a witness and I took this photo, which I thought was really, really cool. So I feel like this is the kind of undesigned witnessing that being part of this process with the gang allows us to be. So the other type of witnessing, also very interesting because it's undesigned, is when we did our code of conduct, we published it. And you know, we're from theater, we're from the performing arts. So when there was a rape joke that was circulated in the media made by someone from the film industry, filmmakers and people in the industry were very upset, and they weren't quite sure how to respond. And Imri, who's also a filmmaker and in both industries, really facilitated a lot of this kind of, you know, Five Arts has done this code of conduct, why don't we try and adopt that? So then Imri contacted me, and one of the actors also contacted me, and we kind of adapted our code of conduct for this group of filmmakers who wanted to make a stand against this very offensive remark that was made. So then suddenly I realized, Imri, who had been witness to our process, has now taken that and kind of like encouraged it to expand. So what I find from this kind of witnessing is that you've actually formed like very extended connections, working collaboratively. So these kind of extensions, not just about the work, extend to other aspects of your work, even to the personal, where you are witness to someone's wedding or the birth of someone's child, or a sort of like reluctant witness to someone's police report. These things kind of merge out from the way that we've been working together for many years. Yeah, so I think I'll kind of end there and be very looking forward to hearing comments or questions about us.
Thank you. And I think it's just nice to see you all on the screen and speaking from your own experience. So it's already some questions on the chat box, which so I use all the notifications to cover them. So I'll go back to them. One question here is, what's the name? Yeah, actors. Yeah. Please go ahead.
No, so I'm just reading. So is the question is, was this the naming of anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist as communist problematic? Anyone want to answer this?
I can give a very quick reply to that. Yeah, I mean, of course, as with any independence movements, it's always a very, very broad spectrum of people who are involved in it, right? You have nationalists, communists, socialists, Islamists, royalists, people who are from various different spectrums of political ideology. And I think this is a situation that you see replicated across the global South, during the 40s to the 60s. In fact, I mean, when we're talking about the communists here, we're talking very much in relation to the performances that we have made and highlighting, right? So in Malaysia, the communists specifically are written out of our history. So that's where the emphasis from us is coming from. But I would like to emphasize actually that these labels are very limited and useful only to a certain degree. Many of the people that we interviewed who were in their 80s and their 90s when we interviewed them, by now, many have passed away. When they went into the jungle to fight the Japanese and then the British in the 40s and the 60s, 50s and 60s, and even the independent Malaysian army up till 1989. When they went into the jungle in the 40s, these were teenagers. These were people in their 20s, and some of them were motivated by political ideology, but many of them were searching for an identity. They were very fluid in terms of trying to figure out who they were, what was this new thing called a nation all about. And I think what's really interesting is that many of these young people, sometimes they change parties because the party was shut down, or they change, they moved to another trade union, or they wore a different hat. They joined an Islamist party because it was convenient and it was available, to move their political agency forward. So there was actually a lot of fluidity, basically young people experimenting with politics. I want to emphasize that. But of course, when one uses the label communist in the Malaysian context, it is a very specific label to eliminate all other identities for this person. It's to mark out this person, and it's to fix this person, basically. So instead of fluidity, we have a kind of like final fixity, such that this person is even not allowed to exist in the country because they are outlawed, right? So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Anyone else wants to respond? Okay, there's some comments in the here. I have always wanted to ask all of you this question. This is from Carmen regarding your collaboration. How do you deal with conflict, or is there very little conflict? Can you speak about the kinds of conflict that arise and how do you manage it as a group or as individual? Thanks. Okay, please go ahead.
Would someone else like to pick this up, guys? How do we deal with conflict?
No, just I think by mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah, just now.
Well, we shout at each other. Well, I think there is for me, actually, it's also how the collective role. So as I say, when we start to work together, we barely know each other. So there is conflict, but there is a very polite response towards the conflict. We may not say directly on certain things, or we try to accommodate everyone's feeling, trying to find a way so that the project won't fail. So that is how probably in the beginning of the collaboration when we just started. But as time goes, as I say in my segment about trust, we start to understand each other more, and we understand who can do what or who cannot do what, So then when there's a disagreement or conflict, we become more confident and dare to voice out our stand or our view. And how do we deal with the conflict? We will fight and argue. But at the same time, I think we also try to find what are the common ground for each other to resolve that differences. Yeah. So this is what I might respond towards Carmen's question.
Anyone else?
I think I agree with Tacey as well. I think the beginning, I always remember our beginning years of collaboration we've had very heated arguments because we tend to use the word no at the beginning of our counter argument. So if someone says, what do you think this, and then another person will immediately say, no. What I think is just a mode of language. And as we mature into knowing each other, we start to realize, okay, it's just, mode of language. And I think as we go along, I totally agree with Tacey. It's understanding each other's capacity and ability. And after a while, we kind of lessen our wall of ego, where we can admit to our weaknesses, where the group is a collective is stronger than an individual with much ego. I think that's one of the means of collaborating and handling the flames of our egos.
I'd just like to add something. I've not worked with Mark as long as I've known Mark for a long time, and I've worked in 5 Arts with him, but I haven't worked with in these kinds of projects for as long as Imri or Tacey have, and then later on Faik and Sham. But I think it's also, aside from saying, I tend not to say no to the director. I tend to accommodate, but I think it's also a belief in what we're trying to say. And it's that belief that we are saying something that is important to, and I believe in that, important to my country, important to the narrative of the counter narrative of this country. Because of that, we are willing to concede certain things. Whatever unless you're really adamant about it, and it's a conflict of ideas and not personalities. So, and that is for the greater good, and not about, as Imri says, and it's not about egos. It's about what are we fighting for? We're fighting for that ideal or that idea, and that keeps us together, I think.
Thank you. And as time is very limited, I will just move to the next questions. And if you guys have other responses to this specific question, please email me and I'll then forward them to everyone. So the next question is from Yiren. So she's asking from the political, economical perspective. So she wants to know that where's your funding? Like where do you get your money from, or is there any limitations as you want to act and also to do art projects? And is this related to how you work together and your individual roles? Thank you.
June, would you like to? Yeah.
So how do we get money? Well, firstly, we're very cheap. So that helps. And secondly, it's a combination. We get some government grants. We also get corporate sponsorship. And thirdly, when we get commission from festivals, that's how we pay ourselves. And then a little bit of the money also goes back to the collective, like a small percentage, so that we can keep the office running. So none of us are considered full-time in performing arts. So we all have other jobs that we do besides making work together. So we have people are teachers, people are like designers for other projects, people are writers or filmmakers. Yeah, so it's a combination of juggling a lot of different sources of income.
Thank you. Go ahead. Did I interrupt you, June?
No, I just want to add that actually audience and ticket sales very small because we're not that kind of company that make like blockbuster show. We really have to take a hybrid approach to your funding.
Okay, thank you. The next question from Charlene. What fuels you about the way art works? I think this is somehow answered one way or another, but you can, add your opinions. Anyone wants to answer?
I'll attempt it. Yeah, it's a very big question, but I think something that interests me personally, and I sense probably interests many in the group as well, is to deal with stories and narratives that are not dealt with, inconvenient, marginalized kind of stories. It's very obvious, like the alternative histories and all that sort of stuff. But I think on a more kind of poetic level, we're also interested in making things that are not present or that are absent present. So how do we bring exiles back is a question we ask a lot. And we try and devise ways to address that question. Sometimes we fail, and sometimes we fail better. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, we're a bit over time, but let's just have 2 more questions and then move to the next section. And this is a question from the question and answer box. So if you can click on the button, a question from Han Lu. Thanks everyone. As you presented, you introduced yourself as a director, performer, producer, etc. But obviously you work in a different process from traditional theater. where labor division is more clear and only the director or the playwright are the authors. I'm curious about the collaborative creative process in details. How is a play conceived and how are creative decisions made? And what are the other challenges of collaboration other than conflict? Anyone?
Sure. I mean, I'll try and address this. So anyone, please join in. I think we didn't mention this, but actually about half of us, I certainly wasn't formally trained as a theater practitioner. So my approach to theater, it's interesting that, in the early days, we worked together in community arts projects where we were really kind of collaborating through being parallel next to each other, visual artists, street artists, filmmakers, theater people. And slowly we managed to find a kind of vocabulary, learning from each other's vocabulary, as well as creating a shared vocabulary. So then when we make performances, we try to really collage these different ways together, these different ways of seeing together. As mentioned initially, there were lots of like the kind of typical conflicts when interdisciplinary kind of things happen. But over time, because of this duration, a vocabulary and an instinct and a kind of collective trust begins to emerge. And people's habits. I mean, habits are also important, like people just have certain habits, and then you kind of work from there. And when I work primarily as a performance maker, I really try and go with what is it that the performers want to share on stage, because ultimately it is their own stories and their own perspectives, and often they are putting their own political subjectivity on the line. So this person wants to say so much, this person wants to take a more ambiguous approach, this person wants to be very, very direct. As long as this person understands the kind of stakes that are at work at different layers, then let's kind of go with that. But a simple way to describe how do we kind of ultimately make decisions, I would like to think I'm not such a dictatorial type of person at all. Usually what happens when a very, very big decision needs to be made or a conflict happens is we stay in the room, and whoever has the stamina to continue staying in the room and to insist on that point, that person tends to win the argument. And then we're like, okay, let's go there, because we can't do it anymore. I'm conscious of time, so we should maybe end soon. There's another session here. Stephanie, you've been very generous with time.
Can I just quickly add something? Because I think, very quickly, because I think if you work together with people for a long time, all this would be very natural. The trust, the belief, and falling into a pattern of doing things. And I think what we're also trying to do is embrace this idea of change, kind of like challenging ourselves in certain ways. And I think as a collective, we are also figuring that out. What does it mean? Because, we are all going in different trajectories in our own careers and also our own personal growth. So how do we also come back together and inject that kind of newness? Because we can't be doing the same almost like work or looking at the same things for 20 years. I mean, we can, but how do we push ourselves that? So that is an interesting question, I think. And I think if we're talking about art or being together or being collaborative, you kind of need that also a little bit of, let's not just keep, patting ourselves on the back and kind of replicating certain things. You kind of need to also try and push yourself a little bit. Yeah.
Thank you. So maybe we'll end here. So I will collect the questions. So maybe you can email me and then I share with the group. Now I will send a group chat code of WeChat for anyone who wants to follow up the question, and also my email. So you can write to me for follow up. So the other two questions is, what are some of the ways you measure the success of a project? What's the other? These are comments. Oh, Xu Zhenhua asked, talking about Malayan emergency, there should be a place for Singapore and the bitter history of imagination on unity. Malaya country? How do you deal with the issue of Malaya, and do you cooperate with friends from Singapore? Okay, so that's the 2 questions. Now, yeah, please email me and I'll share it with everyone. Now, let's hand over to Siming, who will introduce Los Ultras.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.